But also, you know, no one's, as far as I know, doing anything new trying to forward repurpose stuff. No one's doing it from the starting point of it's going to be this and this. And I think, I mean, just having, and you guys will see more of what they're doing and how cool it looks. But also, I think sort of that marriage of this is creating something really fresh. That I think a lot of, I think, you know, this is really ahead of the game in terms of world building and really, as opposed to just, hey, this exists, let's put it here. It's this very careful application of how it's going to exist in these books.
Well, I'm building a world around the story as much as just the story of the story. The story is obviously going to be there. I have a good idea about what I want to do, but the world is being built first. And I've been told that I have a relatively cinematic style too, which should hopefully lend itself to styles, which is another reason I'm really to get involved with it. So, and I see the way the wind is blowing too. So, comics in print is always going to be there in some fashion, but this is sort of a new frontier, and it's a good way to get to a new audience, which is what I'm concerned about too. So that's a storytelling, because you only do it if you want an audience.
Then you have this really layered style to what you do. How are you going to try to translate that into the...
That's where I talk to people who know what they're doing. Okay. But hopefully it'll be a fun experience to learn as well, because I'm all about learning new things. So, yeah.
Well, probably no one here has seen what we're talking about in terms of an illustrated film, since they're not really in existence yet. Guy Killer is the first one, and we want to play a clip so that you guys get a bit of a context on what this is all about. What we'll do first is we'll play the trailer, just so you know what it is, and then we have 2 short clips that'll showcase a little bit of the way that we build a motion, an illustrated film. So what we're going to do now is we have these 2 clips, and I kind of want to showcase that one style that we'll do in some scenes has very little motion at all. And we do something which is interesting because we started developing this, again, before we started seeing the motion comics like Watchmen and stuff. The Watchmen came out sooner because it's an existing book and we just create all the art. But in a lot of those books, they really try and avoid, it's like they have comic book shame, that they're very upset that there are panels. Whereas we really feel like there's an art to the sequential storytelling that we don't want to lose. So we'll use those panels in a lot of cases, and we'll actually integrate that into the way we tell the story. So there's that, where maybe there won't be that much motion, and then there's parts where we'll break out and do set pieces that don't even have stuff that was in the comic book format that we created for it. So the first one is a little bit more of a low-key scene where it's really driven by the audio, and the second one is a little bit more visual. So can we try Guy Killer one, please, Aubrey? So that gives a little bit of a context of what we're doing, and I guess the real core idea behind the whole process is figuring out a way to make really big, epic movies for weirdos. Because that's been my goal all along. And that's why I'm really excited about the different projects that we've been able to put together and Guy Killer finally coming out. SK, why don't you talk a little bit about you coming in from the film world as a producer in the studio system and being interested in how things are changing with the motion comics and illustrated films and the digital.
I think with the illustrated film medium, I think it's a new opportunity to build a brand and fan base that, I hate to sound like a business producer, but it's a lot easier for a studio to want to take a chance on something that pre-exists in the marketplace, that has a following, etc., such as, a God Killer, which normally on paper could be a very risky prospect. It's rated R, it's very hard, edged, it's got a lot of crazy, like I said, stuff for weirdos. But by executing it to a certain degree, as opposed to just, walking with a comic or a graphic novel, etc., that you're taking one step further with these illustrated films, and they're done in a way that can reach a completely different audience also. That's what we have really talked about yet, is we talk about these 2 different ways of doing it, whether it's in print, whether it's the illustrated movie. But also what's exciting, like today's wife has given me a tutorial on the iPad, is I can imagine what I just saw on all these new formats, whether it was in print or motion, or some sort of motion aspect to it. And I think as the new technology comes out, it's exciting to be sort of riding that wave and trying to find these new ways to present new material. And I think that's what's most exciting. You're going to see a couple other things that Matt's come up with that I think are really awesome ideas that I don't think necessarily you could walk into a movie studio and be like, hey, here's this great idea. It's called, Black Sky. It's, it's Band of Brothers versus Squid. And they're going to sit there and go, whereas you could walk in with a finished graphic novel and, the DVD, like you see the God Killer ones up there. But you can sit there and say, this is out there in the marketplace. There are people interested in this, and there are people, there's a fan base for it. And we've already done the legwork. We've already laid out. And, I think there's just a lot of new opportunities out there, both digitally and through traditional methods.
And even just for these properties themselves, I mean, what's really interesting to me is, if any of you are sticking around to see the God Killer film, it's fucking ridiculous. And it's like, you couldn't really go into a studio and be like, we're making this thing called God Killer, because they'd be like, God Killer. And so many people told me that I had to change the name or it wouldn't see the light of day. And I was like, whatever, it's called God Killer. Come on. But then if you, it's just, the whole thing is basically, what happened is I was working on a screenplay that I was writing as a job for a production company we set up in the studio. And I had done 25 rewrites on this thing. And basically, Hollywood wants a script that will play to audiences all around the world, as many people as possible, which is fine. But the problem is that you have to make everything so generic so that everybody around the world gets it. And I understand there's a need to do that when it costs a certain amount of money and the studios are doing it, blah, blah, blah. But I want to make stuff that most people won't get because I like to make stuff for weirdos. And so during this whole process, I wrote this script in between drafts of the other one, which was just basically me letting off steam and saying, fuck you to this whole process. And so that's what God Killer is. So God Killer has everything that I know I would never be able to get away with in a traditional studio system. The interesting thing about it is, we were like, well, we're going to put this thing out on DVD, and it doesn't exist as a comic book or anything yet. There's no fan base for it. So I was like, well, we can do weird things, so we'll do something weird. We'll break the movie into 3 parts, and we'll put them out on 25-minute DVDs. And everyone said to me that I was insane. What the hell is a 25-minute DVD? And I was like, well, it'll be limited edition. We'll sell them at cons. We do horror cons and comic cons and stuff like that. It'll just be a way to introduce it to everybody. But we have this deal where we go through a major, we go through Warner Bros. Atlantic, and legally we have to offer them all our DVDs. So I was like, you guys don't want this thing. It's 25-minute DVD. No one's going to buy this. This is ridiculous. And they're like, well, you think it's cool, we think it's cool, whatever. It's like a 7-inch before an album comes out. We'll give it a try. And it wound up completely befuddling to me. Best Buy, Topping, and all these big chains brought it in. And it sort of was accepted in a way that I would never have anticipated. And then we're finishing the movie, and I meet somebody at Warner Brothers who is interested in it and thinks it's cool, and introduces me to the people who handle the VOD there. So, make a long story short, it's going to come out on DVD and Blu-ray in May, and it's also coming out from Warner Brothers on VOD. So, God Killer, it's called God Killer, is coming out to tens of millions of homes through Charter, Comcast, and Time Warner Cable, and all these totally mainstream. So even as its own format to create weird stuff, it has been really surprisingly sustainable at introducing a new weird world without having to go through the process of convincing a studio that people want to see it. We can just see if people want to see it, and then if they want to see it, then that's awesome.